Okay, great. So we are good on time, and our third presentation is by Dr. Mohamed Elkashef, our assistant professor at OSU. He brings over 20 years of experience in pavements, holding 2 PhD degrees. He has 40+ published journal papers and 2 patents for recycling asphalt materials with bioadditives. He has worked with the University of California, Davis, and serves on Transportation TRB, AKM 20, Binder and Highway Pavement Committee, ASE, these 2 committees. He's a professional engineer in Nevada and California. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Joshua, for the introduction. Thanks, everyone, for being here. It's a beautiful day. I've had to wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning, but other than that, things are going well so far. Do I have control of the, Dr. Joshua, do I have control of the slides? Or? Okay. So my talk today is going to be about asphalt and cracking and asphalt. So I don't know how much of the people who are here, how many of the people who are here today know about asphalt and how much they know about asphalt. So I'll try to keep this as simple as I can. But for those who are not into asphalt, you're going to have to pair up with me and Dr. Andrew, who's also going to talk about asphalt after this presentation. So before I start, I'd like to introduce the research team. So this work is done at OSU. So we have myself, Dr. Mishra, who's an associate professor, and then we have Sina, Adi, and Michael, who are students at OSU. And of course, we're grateful to the support we get from ODOT, the research division, and the materials division. So if you know about asphalt, you know that so far we've been using volumetrics to design asphalt. And as strange as this may sound, but this is what we've been doing all these years. I mean, we're just looking at air voids and using air voids to determine how much binder we need to put into the mix to get good performance. But we never really looked at performance itself. So we never looked at a test to characterize performance. And this has been okay until people started looking into recycled materials, new technologies, different binder sources, new additives, and then they started to realize that volumetrics is not going to be sufficient to be able to characterize these new mixes. So this is where BMD started to come into play. So BMD is just a term which refers, it means balanced mix design. So we're just trying to look at balancing the mix so that we get good cracking performance and good running performance. And if you're not into asphalt, then the challenge that we always get with asphalt is we want to add more binder to get more durability, more ductility, but with the addition of more binder, if we're not too careful, we might end up making our mix rotting susceptible. So that's where the balance needs to come in. Oklahoma has been one of the leading states to look at balanced mix design. They have had several pilot projects, and they have a plan to fully implement balanced mix design within the next few years. We've been working from our side, from OSU, we've been working with ODOT on a number of projects. So the results I'm going to present today are actually come from 2 different projects. We have a project that's led by me on aging, and another project led by Dr. Mishra on the benchmarking study. So what is balanced mix design? So again, I explained this briefly, and I believe Dr. Andrew will go into more details about what balanced mix design is. But basically, we're trying to balance between cracking and rotting. So we're trying to find that sweet spot where we we get good cracking as well as good rotting. And of course, we also have to bear in mind that there are other things that we need to look at. So we need to make sure that our mixes are moisture resistant, durable, now with the environmental impact, so that will also come into the equation. But mainly cracking or rotting are the two main things that we look at. As far as rotting, Oklahoma, they are already using Hamburg wheel rotting test. So that's a test which uses a wheel, a steel wheel, and then these wheels go back and forth on an asphalt specimen, and we're trying to look at how much deformation is happening, how much permanent deformation is happening in the specimen. So as I said, Oklahoma DOT already has this in their specification. They have been using this for years now, and this table here just provides what those specifications are. So basically, we're looking at the x-axis is just the number of cycles that wheel makes, and the y-axis, the rod depth, how much deformation. And we're looking at, for example, if we're using a mix that's a PG64, so we don't want that rod depth to exceed 12.5 millimeter at 10,000 passes. So that's what the specification look like. As far as cracking, this is where it gets more tricky, because when we think about cracking, cracking is not just one term. I mean, we talk about cracking, but cracking, there's different types of cracking. There's fatigue cracking, there's thermal cracking, there's reflective cracking. So finding a test that's able to capture all of these different modes of cracking, it's very difficult. And there are different tests which have been proposed, and Oklahoma decided to move forward with what's called the ideal CT test. It was developed at Texas A&M. And that test looks at a parameter. So it's just a cracking test. So we have this specimen. We're pushing on the specimen, and we're measuring load versus deformation. So how much load we're applying and how much the specimen is deforming under that load. And then using all of this information, we calculate a parameter that's called the CT index. So the higher the CT index, the better the mix. So Oklahoma DOT, they came up with a provisional specification to try on different pilot projects, and the numbers from that provisional specification, they suggested 100 for the CT index for any mix that's to be laid on the surface, and 60 for intermediate and base mixes. So if a mix is tested under using the ideal CT, if it meets those numbers, then it's good to be used in the pavement. So what we did in this study, so we wanted first to see how the mixes we already have, how are they performing under the ideal CT. So if we were just to look at the mixes that we've always been using here in the state and test them using the ideal CT, we just want to get a feeling of what those numbers look like. So we collected 33 different mixes from across the state. These mixes had different composition. So the figure on the left, it shows the different mix types, S3, S4, S5, S6. And if you're not familiar with the ODOT specifications, these different mix types simply refer to the nominal maximum aggregate size. So S3 would be the coarser mix, and then as we move from S3 to S4 to S5, we're actually getting finer gradation. So we had these different mixes, different mix types, and with different binder contents, and also different wrap contents. So we also had mixes. So wrap is recycled asphalt. RAP stands for reclaimed asphalt pavement. So that means that we're taking the old asphalt, using it to make new asphalt. So these mixes, some of them had no RAP, some of them had 15% RAP, 25% RAP, 20% RAP. So we actually had a nice group of mixes, different mixes, and then we tested them using the ideal CT. And those figures here shows the distribution of the S4 and the S3 mixes. So mostly the S4 are the mixes that are used on the surface. The S3 are the ones that are used in the base. And if you look at the distribution and then you draw a line based on that provisional specification, you will find out that if today we were to enforce that specification. For example, for the S4 mix of 100, this means that we're eliminating 50% of all the mixes that are being produced. So just by enforcing that CT index criteria, we're already looking at only selecting the top 50% of our mixes. So that's by itself is a big accomplishment. Now we're looking at going back and going through all the mixes and then only selecting the ones that are providing good cracking performance. Another aspect of cracking is that when we lay the mix, so this is considered day 0. And then with time, this mix, it ages. So what happens is that the mix gets stiffer with time, and it does that because of the climate. So basically an oxidation process is happening. And as the mix ages, it loses some of its cracking resistance. So you could start with a mix that has very good cracking performance, but just because it's aging under the influence of weather, traffic, so it starts to lose performance. So we wanted also to be able to look at that. And there are a lot of research that went into trying to come up with an aging protocol in the lab that simulates how aging happens in the field. So we decided to use 8 hours at 135 degrees C. So basically, we're taking the mix that's being produced from the plant, putting it in an oven for 8 hours at 135 degrees C. And somehow, by doing that, we're simulating 3 to 5 years in the service. So we took all those mixes, 33 mixes, we subjected them to long-term aging, and then we looked at the CT index numbers. And what we found out is that those CT index numbers dropped by almost 50%. So that tells us, like, even if we're designing a good mix today, that mix, after 3 or 5 years from now, it's gonna lose almost 50% of its cracking resistance. So that's something we have to bear in mind. And then we also looked at, okay, is that aging happening at the same rate regardless of the binder grade? Are there any other factors which contribute to that aging? So this is a plot of mixes with PG64 and mixes with PG70. So if you look at this, you might tend to come to the conclusion that polymer modified mixes are more age susceptible. But I would be hesitant to make that kind of conclusion because, again, we're only looking at 33 mixes. That's not a big enough sample to make that kind of conclusion. But I mean, this is an ongoing study, so we're collecting more mixes. So hopefully, as we add more mixes into this, we're gonna have more insight about what's going on. Then we can also look at effect of polymer modifications. So what we found out is that most of the time when you're using a polymer modified binder, that gives you high cracking resistance. So among the mixes that we were testing, we had some PG6422, so that's a neat binder, versus a PG7028, which is a polymer modified binder. And typically, using a polymer modification that increases your cracking resistance. Looking at the mix type, so the mix type is related to the gradation, and the gradation also defines the binder content. So as we use finer gradation, this means that we have more surface area to cover, and that translates into more binder content. So when we look at this, we find out that S5 mixes and S4 mixes generally perform better than S3 mixes. And that's again related to not just the gradation, but also the binder content inside those mixes. RAP, for the most part, RAP tends to decrease the cracking resistance. So whenever we would go from 0% RAP to 20%, 25%, you see a significant decrease in the cracking resistance. And that's not just because of the RAP itself, but also because of the fact that those version mixes, we use we use polymer modified binders in some of them, whereas when we start adding RAP, we don't want those stiff polymer modified binders, so we tend to use a PG64 binder or a PG58 binder, which is not polymer modified. So that also contributed to the reduction in the cracking resistance. We also did rutting, and rutting, again, that's a test that Oklahoma has always used, the Hamburg wheel tracking test, so there is no surprise here. All the mixes that were tested, since they were already designed according to ODOT specification, they all met that specification. Generally, as we go finer, as the mix becomes finer, it tends to be more rutting susceptible, and that's just because of the aggregate structure itself. And this is just a plot of the ideal CT versus rut. So what I just wanted to point out here is that trade-off between cracking and rutting. So the idea that every time we're gonna improve cracking, we're gonna reduce rutting, or vice versa, that's not always the case. I mean, we could, if you look at this, you will see that there are mixes which have the same rut depth and have different CT index, have different cracking resistance, or mixes which have the same cracking resistance but different rutting resistance. So we can change the mix so that we make sure that we have good rutting and good cracking resistance. We looked at predictive modeling, so now we have 33 different mixes with different compositions. We wanted to see if we could use machine learning to be able to predict performance. So could we come up with a model where we could feed all of this information about the mix and get that model to predict the CT index number and see how that model is performing relative to our lab measure results. So we looked at different models, and again, this is a limited study. We only have 33 mixes, so to be able to build that kind of model, we need a very large pool of mixes. But we got some good results even with that limited number of mixes. So like, for example, this curve here, it will show the predicted versus the lab measured. And this is using an artificial neural network. So we actually got an R-square of about 96%. So we're able to predict the CT index to a very high degree. So that's BMD, that's balanced mix design. We're talking about how we design the mix so that we get good cracking and good rutting. But that's not everything. When we're producing these mixes, now we have to think about quality control, quality assurance, and acceptance. So you're designing a mix that has 150 CT index number, but you're doing that in the lab. When you go to the production, that's a different story. So the question is, how's the design different from the production? And the design, in the design stage, we're trying to simulate what's happening in the plant, but there are different things that are happening in the plant, and we may not be able to capture everything. There is also that effect of reheating. So whenever you take a sample from the plant, you have to take that sample, go back to your lab, allow that sample to cool down, and then reheat it. So that additional reheating might also cause some aging, and that might affect the result. And am I on time? Oh, 2 minutes? Okay. Okay, so I'll skip this slide here. So I'm just going to go over what we did. So we looked at production variability. So we wanted to see now if we have a mix that's designed in the lab, are we getting consistent numbers in the plant? So if we look at different samples collected from the plant, different lots, how are these numbers comparing to one another? So this is the figure on the left. It's showing a control mix that was designed using the volumetric procedure. Figure on the right shows a balanced mix design that was designed according to that provisional specification. And if you look at either one of them, you will